The headlines on BBC World News. The British government is to put Greater Manchester and England's north under the toughest coronavirus regime from midnight on Thursday after failing to persuade the city's mayor to implement it voluntarily. The mayor wanted a better compensation deal in return for agreeing the restrictions. As the peace talks stall in Afghanistan, the top US commander has warned about the spike in violence threatening the peace plan. The Nigerian authorities have moved to end 2 weeks of increasingly violent protests against police brutality, which have sparked demands for wider reform. An indefinite 24-hour curfew is in force in the state of Lagos. And Google has been charged with abusing its monopoly over online searches by the US Department of Justice. The action is part of a landmark antitrust suit against the tech giant.
The Justice Department filed a long-awaited antitrust lawsuit today against Google, alleging that the search engine giant used anti-competitive conduct to preserve monopolies in search and search advertising. The government also alleges that Google used billions of dollars collected from advertisements on its platform to pay mobile phone manufacturers, carriers, and browsers to maintain Google as their preset default search engine. Google called the suit, quote, deeply flawed, and said people use Google because they choose to, not because they're forced to or because they can't find alternatives. Goldman Sachs will pay the U.S. government about $2.8 billion and is expected to plead guilty for its role in the bribery scandal involving a corrupt Malaysian government investment fund known as 1MDB. That fine is on top of the nearly $4 billion settlement the bank reached with the Malaysian government last summer. Goldman raised billions of dollars for the fund, much of which was allegedly stolen by people who work for the fund, as well as Malaysian government officials and two senior Goldman bankers. And we report exclusively that the U.S. and Russia are on the verge of an arms control deal that would freeze the number of nuclear warheads on each side. Progress on the deal follows pressure the U.S. has placed on Russia to reach an agreement before the November 3rd election. The deal would extend for a year the so-called START agreement, which cuts long-range arms and is due to expire in February.
A court in Thailand orders the suspension of an online television station. The court accused it of violating measures aimed at ending 3 months of protests. China accuses some U.S. politicians of smearing normal economic and trade cooperation. The United States announces plans to remove Sudan from its state terrorism sponsors list as soon as Sudan's government sets aside $335 million for victims' families. And nearly 30 million Americans have already voted in the U.S. presidential election, which is set to take place on November 3rd.
We start this hour in Alaska, where just hours ago, a magnitude 7.5 earthquake was recorded south of the Aleutian Islands. The Pacific Tsunami Center says there is no longer a tsunami threat, but an advisory is in effect. The powerful quake happened around 12:55 p.m. local time or 20:55 UTC. The epicenter was at a depth of 40 kilometers. The center said 67-centimeter tsunami waves were observed about 90 minutes later in the sparsely populated city of Sand Point. The center is recommending people in the area to remain observant and exercise normal caution near the sea. It also warns people to carefully monitor sea level changes as there may be small fluctuations. President Donald Trump says the U.S. would remove Sudan from its list of state sponsors of terrorism if the African country compensates victims and their families affected by attacks on U.S. embassies in 1998. Trump announced that the Sudanese government has agreed to pay $335 million. Washington has accused former al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden for the attacks on U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. The U.S. courts have ruled that Sudan provided assistance. Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok says removal from the list will help his country get relief from debt, which he says currently stands at more than $60 billion. Hamdok also said that Trump's notification is the strongest support to Sudan's transition to democracy. Sudan is now governed by a military-civilian government. Former President Omar al-Bashir was overthrown last year after 3 decades in power. There is also speculation it could also push Sudan, which is a member of the Arab League, towards normalizing relations with Israel. Last month, the U.S. brokered deals between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Meanwhile, Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic has been center stage as the U.S. election heats up. The president has lashed out at critics and the government's top infectious diseases expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
People are tired of hearing Fauci and all these idiots, these people. Fauci's a disaster. I mean, this guy's, if I listen to him, we have 500,000 deaths.
And I just heard
U.S. media also quoted Trump telling his campaign team that people are tired of hearing about COVID-19. Fauci is a key member of the U.S. government's coronavirus task force and is generally admired by the public. He recently criticized Trump's team for using his comments out of context in a campaign ad. And with the election just 2 weeks away, Democratic challenger Joe Biden has been stepping up his attacks over the coronavirus. In response to Trump's comments, Biden said, "Mr. President, you're right about one thing. The American people are tired. They're tired of your lies about this virus." Johns Hopkins University says around 70,000 new cases were reported in the U.S. on Friday. That's the same level recorded in the summer around the height of the pandemic. And with coronavirus infections spiking again in Europe, Ireland will impose some of the toughest lockdown restrictions in the region to stem the surge. The Irish government said on Monday the country will be placed under the highest level of restrictions for 6 weeks starting midnight Wednesday. Citizens will be allowed to travel within 5 kilometers of their homes. Non-essential retail businesses will close. Pubs and restaurants will be limited to takeaway or delivery. Schools will remain open. Wales in the UK will impose what it calls a circuit break lockdown for 2 weeks starting Friday.
Everyone in Wales will be required to stay at home. This means working from home wherever that is possible.
All non-essential stores will be closed. Pubs and restaurants will only be open for takeaway. Britain's coronavirus caseload has topped 18,000 on some days. Social restrictions are being imposed on a regional basis, depending on the severity of local outbreaks. The number of coronavirus cases across the globe has topped 40 million. According to Johns Hopkins University in the U.S., over 1.1 million people worldwide have died. The U.S. Justice Department says 6 Russian intelligence officers have been charged for orchestrating a series of global cyber attacks targeting government entities and other organizations between 2015 and 2019.
We announced criminal charges against the conspiracy of Russian military intelligence officers who stand accused of conducting the most disruptive and destructive series of computer attacks ever attributed to a single group.
The 6 members face a series of charges, including conspiracy to conduct computer fraud and abuse, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Officials say the attacks caused more than $10 billion in losses. According to the indictment, the accused hacked into the 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea and deleted data from thousands of computers related to the event. It says the hackers also disrupted Ukraine's power supply in the middle of winter and harmed the operations of a healthcare system in the U.S. state of Pennsylvania. Officials also accused the Russian members of disrupting the 2017 election in France through hacks that targeted political party officials. British government officials who participated in the investigation said the attacks also targeted organizations involved in the 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games before they were postponed. The Tokyo Games were originally scheduled to be held this summer, but were pushed back until next year due to the coronavirus pandemic. Justice Department officials say the timing of the indictment was unrelated to the upcoming U.S. presidential election, but said voters should feel confident that their ballots will be counted properly. The International Monetary Fund has come out with a report suggesting digital money has the potential to be widely adopted and used. In the report published on Monday, the IMF says making payments or transferring funds across borders could be as easy as sending email. But the report points out possible risks, such as the use of digital money in crime. It says digital money could make it harder for regulators to enforce exchange restrictions or manage capital flows. U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said a number of things need to be considered before introducing a central bank-backed digital currency, or CBDC.
We do think it's more important to get it right than to be the first, and getting it right means that we not only look at the potential benefits of a CBDC, but also the potential risks and also recognize the important trade-offs that have to be thought through carefully.
China has been testing out a digital yuan, and Facebook has announced its own digital money called Libra. Caviar has been a highly coveted delicacy for centuries. The Caspian Sea was long the best-known producer, but today caviar from China dominates the market. Our next story takes a look at how the industry is evolving.
At a tasting at a luxury hotel in Beijing in September, succulent black eggs are savored by business executives and chefs. The caviar is not imported, but farm-raised right in China. It winds up in the first-class cabins of international airlines and fine French restaurants in Paris.
I think it's and the very good quality and very professionally run business. So I think it's very good, very good.
It all starts in Zhejiang province with this aquaculture farm on a lake. With 200,000 sturgeon, the farm is the biggest in the world and produces 1/3 of global exports, according to the manager. Han Lei previously worked at a government think tank on marine industries. The farm's rapid growth is attributed to abundant funds from investors and government support. With that help, he acquired a vast site and developed a system to automatically regulate the temperature and oxygen level in the water. He finally created an ideal environment for the fish. To cater to various markets, he raises 7 different varieties of sturgeon. They range from affordable to expensive ones.
Our goal is to make caviar more accessible so that even average families can enjoy it with their meals.
This town in Iran is near the Caspian Sea, where sturgeon fishing once flourished. Mohammed Bahashai used to catch wild sturgeon. Overfishing and pollution caused stocks to dwindle, and fishing was banned in 2010. Bahashai started an aquaculture farm, but it is hard to compete with bigger Chinese companies.
China has moved to mass production. We can't compete using our same old methods.
Bahashai decided to focus on beluga sturgeon, which produces the finest grade of caviar, accounting for an estimated 1% of the total market. The fish are raised in water piped in from the Caspian Sea, their native environment, and can weigh up to 400 kilos.
We stay competitive by producing a high-quality product. We hope Iran will reclaim its position in the global market.
An estimated 90% of caviar being traded now is farm-raised. With companies in Japan and Europe entering the industry, there is more competition to meet the world's growing taste for caviar.